went to art school fairly late. I was 39 when I started, and prior to that, mostly did what I call the womanly arts, which was sewing, basketry, working with fiber, and working with fabric. And then considered kind of a ugly stepsister to real art. You know, it was in the category of being a craft, but since then has changed a lot, and as fiber artists have become more and more prominent, I like to see those boundaries melted a lot more than they were then. I majored in painting and basically struggled with it for 4 years, and finally I had one epiphany. I had been, as a painter, tried on a lot of different styles for size. I did Impressionism, I did abstract expressionism, I did Fauvism. Like most painting students, I tried it all on. And at the very last month, my art teacher was really a brilliant teacher, Rob Moore, came in and said, I was working very laboriously in painting, and said, "Oh, are you liking what you're doing?" I said, "No, I absolutely hate it." And he said, "Great, it's a great place to begin." So I did. I sat on the floor with a piece of charcoal and a big piece of paper and started to draw, just as I used to draw as a child. And the last painting I did in art school, to me, was the first painting I did that represented my own voice. And since then, I've worked hard and tried to be true to my own voice in a variety of different media, as you'll see. So, anyways, I'll start off with the ball series. And this is me underneath a clothes ball, of which I did many. Although I studied 2D, I was always drawn to 3D. And 2D seemed an exercise in frustration, trying to make a flat thing look like it had depth. So eventually I started to do something in 3D, and the first form that drew me was the ball. For obvious reasons, it's kind of an archetypal shape. I find really beautiful shape. And this was, how I started this, I'm not sure. I had a bunch of old clothes, and I started to tear them up and wind them around and around and around. Again, I'm not sure where that came from, except I do remember my mother doing that with skeins of wool and watching the ball get bigger and bigger. And eventually I continued, and I did more, and I got bigger, and people gave me old clothes, and I found that it was sort of both mesmerizing and sort of interesting, because all that sort of represented people's history in the old clothes. And the balls started to multiply, and I did more and more and more. And I did balls out of bittersweet, and this is like plastic tubing. And the balls are, the big one is, as you can see, scaled to me, and the smaller ones are about this wide. And then I didn't always do balls. There are other shapes, after all. And this is about 6 feet tall, and again made out of old clothes, and it turned out to be a great punching bag, actually. And I think I was drawn to old, discarded clothes, and then for the reason that they sort of had a history. And then, of course, I turned to shoes, being a shoe fanatic, and made a shoe ball. And this is attached with wire, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I eventually called this 10,000 miles, because it always sort of touched me to think that those shoes, I mean, it might turn some people off, but those shoes were actually worn and went places that I could only imagine. And this is the shoe ball on a pedestal, which gives it a little more gravitas, I guess. And I found the shoes also could have a certain elegance. These all fit together without any adhesive or anything, and it's something that the shape naturally lends itself to. I find sometimes I look at things and I think, well, what does this want me to do for it? And the shoes, just fiddling around with them, this is what emerged. I did several of these. These are called shoe heels. And I worked with coat hangers. actually, and made a coat hanger ball. And I kind of like the sort of the sprongy energy of it. If any of you have struggled with coat hangers, you know that they have a life of their own. And these are bent and twisted and attached so that they are intact, although occasionally one would sprung out. And that's a kind of a close-up of the snarl of the hangers. And this is a wire ball made out of garden variety. I think it's 26 gauge wire. It's about this wide in diameter. And this was, again, crimped and twisted and crimped and twisted. And I just like the sort of the energy that I felt. It sort of reminded me of, you know, atoms or electrons or whatever. And it sort of had an intrinsic energy, and it seems solid, but at the same time it's sort of translucent. If you put it in front of a window, you can actually see through it. But close up, it's a very solid snarl of wire. This is Kleenex, and again, I've always been drawn to that which is common and commonly found. The Kleenex, again, had something about its folded, had a certain kind of elegance and beauty that drew me. And what I did was I made a wire. It's about this big in diameter, and I made a wire, or almost like a chicken wire superstructure, understructure, and then poked the Kleenex through and attached it so it wouldn't come out. And it's a pink one, pink Kleenex. And again, a close-up of really how pretty and flower-like the Kleenex is altogether. The balls started to get a little more bizarre and started hanging and started doing something different. And I started to see the clothing as sort of stuffing the ball into a piece. This is in fact pantyhose, which is I found out was an amazingly versatile material, incredibly light, incredibly strong, incredibly stretchy. And I started to think again how as women we tend to stuff our very, very varied bodies into a sort of one-size-fits-all thing, and the frustration of that. And a series sort of emerged called Nothing Fits Me Anymore. And I continued with some of these shapes that were reminiscent of the frustration and sort of the absurdity of fitting ourselves into clothing. This is not a good thing, but these are a pair of gloves I found at the flea market, absolutely unused, wrapped in their original tissue paper, which I found just stunning. They were incredibly long, incredibly unsuited to any normal hand or arm, but that was in fact the way they were made. And it sort of made me think of women's clothing, how it, just like high heels, how they can be both empowering, they raise your height, and they can be disabling because you can't run. There's almost a weapon-like thing with a heel, we call them stilettos. And these sort of same thing, there's a certain elegance and length to them, and yet how in God's name would you put them on? So again, I'm working with the dichotomy of disablement and empowerment. It's another hanging. And these are 390s, again, addressing the ill-fitting, ill-fit between clothing and bodies. This is I went from, let's see, clothing and shoes to finally to accessories, handbags, and did a series of handbags called My Pocketbook Myself. And most women have a very interesting relationship with their pocketbooks. They're very close to them, and yet frustrated by them. I can never find the right one. They're burdensome, and yet they allow us to be autonomous and independent because they have everything we need in them. You know, Advil, you know, handkerchiefs, everything. And but they're sort of a puzzlement. And this is called the shoulder bag, which obviously addresses, you know, the cut of the shoulder. The bag will do. It's heavy enough. And this is actually I'll just grab my bag. It's called. It's cement, which I actually poured into a handbag and let set, and then put in the hardware. Again, almost like visual kind of riffs on the variety of handbags and some of the frustration of the handbags that we experience as women. This is called a dentata, which is made out of a shark jaw and velvet, red on the inside, black on the outside. And this, I was sort of thinking of how the inside of a handbag is sort of a very forbidden area. I mean, most men I know do not go riffling into women's handbags, you know, with any kind of ease. And so this sort of addresses that. And this is like, you know, no trespassing. And this is a close-up of it. And this is a clutch bag made out of an old X-ray, sewn and attached to real Coco Chanel clasp. And this is a zip bag made entirely of zippers, again addressing all the compartments and the utter impracticalness of too many compartments in the bag. And this is the backpack. And this is Don't Mess With Me bag. And this is, again, bag as weapon. As we all know, we hear stories of the little old lady who bombed the robber and had in her handbag. Again, the nails, just garden variety nails. And this is made out of lead, actually, and sewn. And I got very enchanted, as I'll show you later, with lead as a medium. It's both incredibly, obviously heavy, but also incredibly malleable. It almost acted like fabric. And this was actually attached and sewn on the top, which is hard to see. And this is a slouch bag, again made with lead, roofing lead, which you can get at Home Depot, and lined in red velvet. And you can see that what you can do with lead is quite remarkable. It almost acts like fabric. And meanwhile, I was working as a printmaker in the print studio, and did a lot of printmaking, but again, always seemed to be trying to create something with depth, something that looked three-dimensional in two dimensions. And these are about 6 feet tall, about 2.5 feet wide. And I sort of stumbled on this method. What I did was I inked a big plexi plate, and then I actually laid the garment into it, as well as a kind of a scarf. And then I inked another plate and sandwiched it in, sandwiched the fabric in between, put it through the press, took the plates off, lifted out the fabric, and then printed each plate. So it's actually an embossment, and it gives almost an X-ray-like quality to the fabric. I mean, so you see things in the fabric that you wouldn't ordinarily see with the naked eye. And the lighter it is, the thicker it is. So it's really sort of a chronicle of the pressure of the thickness of the fabric onto the ink. And this is a baby's dress done in the same manner. Again, keep working with you know, fabric and clothing. These are Polaroid emulsions, and they're tiny, they're about this big. You take a Polaroid and you can actually tease off the top of it by soaking it in water and putting it on a plate and manipulating it. So it's a photograph that you can actually take and sort of mush around. And so I did several of these, again, following the clothing theme. This is actually a photo of a piano, you can see. translucence that I was really drawn to. And this is me, I couldn't resist hanging myself up to dry. This is a series of breastplates. I went back to the lead because I was so enchanted by it. It always seems like the dangerous materials are the most alluring. It was kind of a hard time in my life, and I started by, the intent was I was going to make brass shields as a sort of self-protection. And, but it ended up being more torsos rather than shields. And the lead is amazing. As I said, it's soft and malleable, yet it's strong enough to repel X-rays. And it can be torn and punctured and sewn and all sorts of things. And so these are actually worked from the inside out. Tap the other side and push the lead very, very slowly out to create form. And also bend it. This is actually a zipper sewn in. And these are various forms. I think I did 50 of these. And I did every shape and form that I could think of. And the folds in this are created by folding and then putting the lead through the press, actually, that really kind of flattened folds, so it made it look like sort of a very thin fabric over the torso. And they were very absorbing, and probably absorbed me for about a year. This is sort of the Valkyrian torso, and then the somewhat older woman on the left. And obviously, for a litter. And this is kind of a mischievous one. And I just went on and on. I went on as much as I could. This is more of seems like more of an armor. And, okay, so anyways, after I did the breastplates, I was invited to go to an artist colony. And I went without very much materials. I had some charcoal and paper. And I didn't have much space to work in. So I started folding paper into hats. I started making hats. And what I was thinking of was that back in the old days, nurses had these extraordinary hats that would represent what school they graduated from. And they were these amazing sort of white starched creations, all different shapes. And I also remember as a child watching the nuns scurry by with their amazing hats and thinking, God, it's just, how could that be? They're so utterly impractical, yet so noticeable and quite elegant. So the paper was great, but it was very difficult to maintain a shape. So I turned to aluminum screening and started to bend and roll and shape that into sort of hat-like concoctions that eventually sort of morphed into more organic forms, floral and this sort of reminds me of the heart and looking through the organs of an internal organ.
What size are these?
These are about this high, most of them. And again, I did dozens of these. And the screening just lent itself to wonderful shapes and whirls, and again, the transparency to be able to see inside it. So they multiplied, and they started to feel way more organic than and more reminiscent of the organs of the human body. So I started to, I think as a nurse and as a kind of a long career in medicine, you know, I've always been fascinated with anatomy and physiology. I've loved to study it, and that the beauty of the human body is an amazing thing. At that point, when I was out at the colony, I picked up an old medical book from about the turn of the century with these absolutely beautiful engravings of the inside of the body. So, you know, by peeling the skin off, this is sort of what you see. And these are large linoleum cuts. They're about, I'd say about 4 foot by 3 foot. And you know, they're influenced by the anatomical engravings. And I did 6 big ones. Again, head, heart, pelvis, and the hand, and ribs, and the neck. And how I did them to get the colors, I actually took a piece of mulberry paper and I colored a plate and put it through the press. So I actually got a piece of colored paper. Then I inked the linoleum with black ink and laid the paper on it, went through the press and pulled it off. So the colored part are the grooves that I dug out. And these, again, I also did my fingerprints because they kind of lent themselves to the cut of the linoleum. And down here I actually, at the time there was 9/11, everybody was obsessed with identity and how you can identify people and screen them and, you know, let them in or don't let them in. So I was sort of, you know, I got into the fingerprints sort of thinking of that. And the amazing thing about a fingerprint is that you look at it, it just says absolutely nothing about me, who I am, and yet it is a definitive identity of who I am. So it's sort of ironic that something so impersonal could be so definitively attached to who I am, and so absolutely have nothing to do with who I really am. These are like jet print self-portraits imposed on the fingerprint. Okay, this is jumping to, again, I got into self-portraiture more here, and I had a pile of buttons that I kept for years, and I had looked at them and I thought, you know, I could probably do something with these. And that's what I do. I have a lot of different materials in the studio, and I look at them and I keep them. Sometimes I never touch them, but sometimes I look at them and I know exactly what they want to be. Sometimes I start with an idea and look around and say, how can I manifest this idea with the materials I have? And sometimes I'll start with a material and fiddle with it and battle with it and manipulate it till I find what it wants to be. That's sort of how I describe it. So these are about 3 feet by 2.5 feet. They're quite large, and they are made out of buttons. And the buttons are sewn with monofilament onto aluminum screening. And it's really like a mosaic, except it's buttons. And the farther away, the better the resolution. And the closer, obviously, it breaks up into buttons. And I'm certainly not the first to do this. Chuck Close is a perfect example of somebody who's done this kind of thing. But the buttons are perfect. They're little bits of color. There's infinite variety. They have texture. They have reflectiveness. They have all sorts of things that really lend themselves to this kind of work. This is my granddaughter who was just born. Once I committed myself to my self-portrait and then my granddaughter was born, I knew that I was going to do 5 generations of my family, all the women. So that's what I ended up doing. That's my daughter. And that's my mother. And that's my grandmother. And I'll show you a little bit about the process. You can see it in the next slide. Okay. I work flat. I had the buttons all around me as my palette. And I had a template underneath of a photograph of, in this case, my grandmother, that I had enlarged on the computer and sort of had big pixels that were about button size. So I could work with that as a template and get mostly the tonal variations is what I needed to do. And then to make sure I was on track, I actually climbed up a ladder and looked down to make sure the resolution was working. And I found that the more I did it, the more free I felt to use. It didn't matter what the color of the button was as long as the tone was right. And I also got very picky about my buttons. You know, I started to, you know, there's mother of pearl and there's all sorts of different ones. So it became more and more laborious, but incredibly satisfying, actually. This project probably took about 2 years. And that's my mother, and this is as we get closer, it starts to break up. Closer yet, it's unrecognizable, but you can see how the buttons start to dominate. And that's what a little bit of it looks like. So 2 years of this, I knew probably I'd reached my limit, at least for now. My son kept saying, well, when are you going to do the men of the family? And so we're going to have to wait for that. But it was very gratifying and really kind of a labor of love because I was doing portraits of people in my family that I love. So, let's see the next. Oh yeah, this is, you can see again the process. And after I finished the buttons, I was kind of at a loss. So I turned to something that I often turn to, which is wire. And wire, kind of drawing with wire and manipulating wire, which I've always found satisfying. It's a great way for me to draw because I can get 3 dimensions but still use a line. So I started working and just sort of crimping and you know, manipulating the wire. The forms started to sort of show shapes. I would put the wire, do something with the wire, and then staple it onto the helmet so I could keep on going with one long continuous piece of wire. And it got sort of more chaotic, and forms started. And I started to, you know, I started a narrative within this sort of chaotic mass of wire, and then started to do individual vignettes. And just had fun with it, which is what I certainly need to do after the end of the button era. It was fun. You know, I did a lot of it. Some were a little bawdy, and usually, but they have a kind of a drawn quality. As I was working with the wire, I realized that I could make it more 3-dimensional, and I started again making forms by crimping and wrapping and crimping and wrapping. This is one of the first I did. And I realized that this was a whole other area using wire that I hadn't really explored and was really interested in. And I started making odd forms, again, often body parts. And this is a leg arm. And this is an internal anatomical sort of stomachy kind of thing. This is a leg wheel, and these legs are, each one is about, well, it's about the size of a leg. And I did a kind of an underpinning of thick wire, tried to follow the bone structure, and then actually put the finer gauge wire around the bone to fill it in. And let's see a little bit. And sort of the solidity of it and how much wire is involved. And also some of the transparency of it too. And I started to look again at my anatomy books for forms. And this is sort of a reminiscent of around the neck, the esophagus, the larynx, and the trachea. And it's certainly not an exact rendition, but it inspired this particular shape. You can sort of see from close up some of what I did. You know, encasing those tubes with a sort of a fascia. And they get more and more intricate. This is sort of again reminiscent of some weird thing. And this is actually reminiscent of the optic nerve, where it does an extraordinary sort of cross so that you don't see everything upside down. And this is actually informed by the cochlear bone of the ear. These are big, about this big. And certainly not exact, but inspired by it. This, I apologize for the quality of the slides, but these are hands, and they're my own hands, actually. And again, I used kind of a big gauge bone structure, and actually I found that telephone wire and incorporated it. It sort of reminded me of the vascular system. And this is sort of the last bit of this, is sort of a walk through the studio. I recently had an open studio, so I had a lot of stuff up, but it sort of gives an idea of the environment that I work in and how I try to have a lot of things in front of me. Whether I use them or not is another matter, but I need that to get ideas. And you can see, you know, some of the things I've shown you. My friend the computer, friend and enemy. But it has been a useful tool for me. And the breastplates of the handbags, wire work. And there's my grandmother smiling at the weird sculpture next to her. And the general sort of chaos of tools and whatever else I might need to create what I do. And that's all she wrote. Anyways, so any questions or?